There's a moment most people know. It's been a brutal week. Maybe you got a harsh email from your boss, had an argument with someone you love, or sat in traffic for an hour when you were already running late. And then, almost without deciding to, you open your phone, you buy something, you order food you didn't need, and you upgrade something you were fine with yesterday. And afterwards you feel worse. Because now you feel guilty on top of stressed. You didn't solve anything. You just added a financial consequence to an emotional problem. Here's the thing though, that wasn't weakness. That was neuroscience. And once you understand exactly what your brain is doing in those moments, you can actually interrupt it. Today we're going to break down the psychological and neurological mechanism behind stress spending, not at a surface level but at the level of brain chemistry, evolutionary biology, and decision science. Because you spend when you're stressed is only half the story. The other half, the part that actually changes behavior, is why, and more importantly, how specifically it hijacks your financial judgment. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you know we don't do surface level here. Hit subscribe if you're new because this is where financial psychology actually lives. And share this with someone who's been calling their spending a bad habit. Because it's not a habit. It's a system. And systems respond to different interventions than habits do. Let's get into it. The cortisol reward circuit. When you experience stress, real or perceived, your brain activates the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system. It floods your bloodstream with cortisol. Cortisol is your body's emergency broadcast system. It says, resources are scarce, threats are real, act fast. Here's what cortisol does to your decision-making. It increases your sensitivity to reward signals. Specifically, it amplifies dopaminergic activity in the nucleus accumbens, your brain's reward center. This is not a metaphor. This is a documented neurological mechanism. A 2013 study in the journal Neuron by researchers at the University of Zurich found that acute stress increased reward-seeking behavior by measurably increasing dopamine sensitivity in the ventral striatum. Translation: when you're stressed, rewards feel more rewarding. The same purchase, the same meal, the same impulse. It generates more dopamine under stress than it would in a calm state. Your brain is literally amplifying the pull of anything that promises relief. And it gets worse. Cortisol simultaneously suppresses activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for calculating future consequences, weighing trade-offs, and applying self-control. It doesn't just make rewards feel stronger. It weakens the exact mechanism you need to resist them. So you're not failing to resist temptation when you stress spend. You're operating with a chemically impaired prefrontal cortex and a chemically hypersensitized reward system. Simultaneously. At the same time. The deck is stacked at a neurological level. Why shopping specifically? Now here's where it gets interesting. Why the shopping? Why not some other reward behavior? The answer is control. When you're stressed, what you're experiencing, at a neurological level, is a lack of control. The stressor, whatever it is, represents something that happened to you. Something you didn't choose, didn't prevent, and couldn't fully manage. And your nervous system registers that loss of agency as a threat signal, layered on top of the original stressor. Psychologist Christina Durante at the University of Texas published research in the Journal of Consumer Research showing that stress, specifically uncontrollable stress, dramatically increases purchasing behavior. But here's the key finding. What people bought under stress skewed heavily toward items that represented choice and agency. They weren't buying things they necessarily needed. They were buying the act of choosing. A checkout cart is one of the few spaces where you have complete control. You decide what goes in. You decide what comes out. You decide when to proceed. In a week where your boss made a unilateral decision that affected your income, or your landlord raised your rent without warning, or the health system gave you news you didn't ask for, the shopping cart is one of the only places where the world does exactly what you tell it to. This is why retail therapy is not a metaphor. It's a documented psychological mechanism, the temporary restoration of perceived control through the act of purchasing. The problem is that the relief is real but brief, and the financial consequence is real and lasting. The temporal discounting acceleration. Here's another mechanism that most people don't know about. Under stress, your brain doesn't just want rewards, it wants them now. Psychologists call this temporal discounting, the way we value immediate rewards more than delayed ones. And stress dramatically accelerates it. A 2012 study published in Psychological Science found that participants who were exposed to an acute stressor made significantly more impulsive choices in economic decision games afterwards. They accepted worse trade-offs in exchange for receiving the reward sooner. Their temporal discount rate spiked. What this means in practice, that thing you were on the fence about buying which felt like a reasonable, maybe I'll wait and see, last Tuesday, under stress on Friday afternoon it feels urgent. The wait feels genuinely unbearable. The delayed version feels genuinely less valuable. Not because anything about the purchase changed. Because your brain's time preference circuitry got overridden by cortisol. The mood repair model. Researchers Tice, Bratslavsky, and Baumeister proposed the mood repair model of self-control failure. Under negative emotional states, People prioritize immediate mood improvement over long-term goals. Not because they forget the long-term goal, but because the brain assigns a temporary priority override to the emotional distress. In plain language, your brain knows perfectly well that spending is a bad long-term decision in a given moment. But it overrides that knowledge because fixing the emotional state feels more urgent. It's not ignorance. It's triage. Your brain is triaging your psychological survival over your financial future. And this is where the guilt trap comes in. You spend. The dopamine hits. The cortisol briefly drops. You feel a flash of relief. Then the cortisol comes back, now amplified by the guilt of having spent money you didn't plan to spend. So you're more stressed than you were before, which makes the reward circuitry more sensitive, which makes the next impulse hit harder. This is the stress spend spiral. And it's not a character flaw. It's a feedback loop with a biological engine. The 4 interventions that actually work. Intervention 1, the 20-minute circuit breaker. The dopamine spike from a stress-triggered purchase impulse peaks and begins to decline within 15 to 20 minutes if you don't act on it. If you can delay the purchase decision by 20 minutes, not cancel it, just delay it, the neurological urgency drops significantly. Set a rule. Any unplanned purchase over $30 requires a 20-minute wait, during which you do something that involves physical movement. Walk around the block. Do 20 push-ups. The physical activity directly metabolizes cortisol and reduces dopamine sensitivity back toward baseline. Intervention 2, the stress purchase journal. For 30 days, every time you make an unplanned purchase, record what happened in the 2 hours before, what you were feeling physically, and what you told yourself about the purchase. The act of tracking activates your prefrontal cortex, the exact thing cortisol suppresses. Within 2 weeks, most people who do this start noticing the trigger pattern before they complete the purchase, not after. Intervention 3, the control restoration protocol. Since the core driver of stress spending is loss of control, the intervention is to restore a sense of control through a non-financial mechanism before you reach for your wallet. Build a short list of things you can do in under 10 minutes that give you a genuine sense of agency. Reorganizing something. Finishing a small task. Making a decision you've been delaying. These activities target the same neurological need without the financial consequence. Intervention 4, scheduled stress spending. Designate $50 to $100 per month as your explicit stress relief budget. No category restrictions. No guilt. The rule is simply that you can only spend it during the designated window and not in reactive moments. If you're finding this useful, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We cover this every week, and this is exactly the kind of framework that changes everything once you have it. The part that changes everything. Stress spending isn't a spending problem. It's a stress problem with a financial symptom. The spending is your brain's clumsy attempt to restore control, reduce cortisol, and briefly reset its reward baseline. When you treat it as a spending problem, you try harder to resist, feel worse when you fail, and tighten the spiral. When you treat it as a stress problem, you start asking, where is the uncontrolled stress coming from? What control can I restore at the source? Understanding this mechanism gives you something that no amount of willpower generates: compassion for your own behavior. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're running a brain that was designed for a world where cortisol meant a predator was nearby. Work with your brain's design, not against it. And watch what happens to your financial behavior when the stress system stops driving the bus. See you in the next one.